All right, hi everyone. I'm Gabrielle. And full disclosure, I am not a neuroscientist. I'm just a nice little Italian lady that got a job at a cemetery a week before a pandemic and became a death doula. So I'm very interested in these things. I'm ready to start when y'all are. Okay, so a mourning mindset. We love alliteration here. What can neuroscience teach us about grief? Let's go to the next slide, Ben, please. Look at that big old brain. Has anyone really thought about your brain on grief? Show of hands. Anyone thought about that? Okay, very good. Next slide. So what kind of changes does your brain undergo while you're grieving? A lot of grief researchers, most notably Mary Frances O'Connor, note that our brains have to pull data from so many various systems in order to process, understand, and even believe a loss. So, in short, our brains are just as confused as our hearts are. Go to the next slide, please. Okay, so a lot of grief researchers use this thought experiment. You've had a gaudy dining room table your entire life. And every night when you stumble downstairs for a glass of water, you expect to bump into it. But it's gone. You've sold it, it got ruined. And you know it's not there anymore, but still, in your haphazard way down the stairs, strolling into the kitchen, you still expect to bump into it. And you might feel really odd about still thinking it's there, right? It's the absence of something that confuses us the most. It's where did it go? Even if you know that it absolutely is gone. So your brain really was just following a map, a program. Our brains really are like computers, biologic computers, right? So it was just following a virtual map. It was using data that it has had for a very long time. And every once in a while, it is hard and difficult and takes a lot of time to unlearn this, even though you might know in your conscious mind that that programming is now obsolete. Next slide. All right, so scientists actually do know the area in the hippocampus where that map is stored. That's that little seahorse-shaped looking guy in your beautiful noggin. So they conducted research with rats, right? Look at that cute little guy up there. And they recorded the way that their neurons fired. So research actually shows that the neural cells fired when a rat approached where the dining room table was, right? In this case, it was just a little blue box and a little rat labyrinth. And it was still following an old map that indicated it was there. And this happened for days and days and days until finally the rat truly understood that the table was no longer there. But again, we must do the same thing and update our virtual maps. Next slide, please. Okay, so this brings me into saying it out loud. Speaking of virtual maps and just the way our brains store these things, when my Uncle Vinny died, we got his truck. We've had it on the driveway for 7 years. But funnily enough, the other night I get home, sleep deprived, tired, hungry, and I see the truck on the driveway, and I have a thought. Why is Uncle Vinny here so late? He's been dead 7 years. I don't know why I had this thought. I felt so odd that I had this thought, and I didn't even want to tell anyone out loud because I had this shame and guilt that I forgot for a moment that he was gone. But I talked to my cousin about it the next day, and she said, "That's hilarious because I just picked up the phone to ask him where to get an oil change." So we have to talk about these things. So having conversations about death, dying, grief, and loss can really lead to normalizing and understanding how our minds, bodies, and spirits process death and a loss. So the next one, so I'm going to highlight some of the people that you can talk to about these things. Doctors, scientists, researchers, funeral directors, estate lawyers. I obviously have to bring up death doulas like myself. And if you don't know, anybody not know what a death doula is here? Okay, you know what a birth doula is? Someone helps someone come on the way in. We help people on their way out and their loved ones. Think of it as non-medical palliative care. So we could be on the team with hospice workers and doctors and family members and funeral directors and lawyers to make sure that everything that you want is honored. And we could talk to you about things like your brain on grief. We might not be absolute experts, but you can be like me and want to read about it and talk to an entire cemetery full of people about it. So celebrants and ritual experts, your local cemetery workers, I do want to shout out. We have Bogdan, Joey, and Sarah here tonight. They will be helping out around here, so if you see them around the bar or the garbage cans or the bathrooms, say hello to them, ask them questions you may have. Death literacy programmers. There are so many people out there running death cafes. I just met one on the bar line, actually. So go and find those events. Find those lectures, find those virtual events. Come back to Greenwood. We have 30 death education programs a year. And filmmakers, which there'll be a Q&A, so you could ask them those questions when we get to the Q&A. All right, my favorite new phrase that I want all of you to learn is parasocial grief. So parasocial grief is a grief we experience for people we've never met, celebrities, public figures, etc. This famous director up here, maybe some of you have grieved them. Maria, you know who you are. So although these are one-sided relationships, they can feel like profound personal losses because of the way our brains categorize them. They don't really know the difference. Next slide, please. So going into parasocial grief just a little bit further, even though it's a one-sided relationship, these people helped define us, right? So we do categorize them the same way our brains categorize two-sided relationships with people that we formed intense, deep attachment bonds with, like a parent or a best friend. All right, next. And just a few little anecdotes, old habits. There are some people that experience prolonged grief, and what can that really look like, right? Again, like I said, with attachment, episodic memory and habit conflict with our magical thinking that is created through that process. And it can lead to grieving taking a little bit more time. So what can that look like? I'm just going to tell a quick story about Vivian. Her husband died. Every day she's still going to the grocery store. She's buying food for two. She's cooking for two. She's scraping it into the garbage. And she was so worried about telling her family about this. She didn't want them to think that, she really couldn't cope. But after utilizing complicated grief therapy, she took what her brain couldn't do and worked with her therapist to create some goals and activities. And one was, if your brain is unwilling to unlearn, or learn rather, that your husband is gone and you can't, pick up that extra thing of carrots, let's cook it anyway. Let's freeze it. Let's bring it to the community. So there are a lot of ways that we could transform our grief into something productive and to help us form new habits. Next slide. And one of the last things I'll say too are time and space help us put all this into relation, right? So here, now, and close are 3 words that can really help us understand where we place these loved ones in our minds. I'm sure many of us have experienced magical thinking. They're away on a trip. I can't believe it. I feel like they're just around the corner. They're going to walk through the door any second, right? Take some comfort in our biology here. Evolutionarily speaking, those that really truly believed their mate would come back with food for their young had a better chance of survival. So maybe this is one of our most primal hopes and something that does serve as fuel for us to keep surviving. Next slide. Also, I used that little slide from Interstellar for a reason. So tips for grieving. Really simple. It might seem simple, but I'm going to say them out loud. Because what did we learn? Saying it out loud is very important. Read, write, watch. You're about to watch a bunch of wonderful movies that tackle death, dying, grief, and loss. Therapy in motion. Come to the cemetery, take a stroll, do some movement meditation for grief, yoga for grief. Who's on your support team? Maybe it's the person you're sitting next to. Maybe it's a death doula because you don't want to talk to a family member about it. It might feel too close, right? And what rituals can you create? And finally, what science can support your understanding of death, dying, grief, and loss? So there you have it, just a tiny little slice about your brain on grief and what neuroscience can teach us about it. If you have any questions, please come see us over at the table and enjoy these incredible films. And we'll see you later.